everyone. Welcome back to the greatest show in the galaxy, the show where I, the curator, discuss and talk about my favorite show of all time, my favorite franchise of all time, Doctor Who. Now, before we get started, there's a little bit of house cleaning that I think I should get around to before we get into the actual topic of the episode, which is in the title of this episode, and also I will make sure is in the thumbnail. I am pre-recording this. This is a pre-tape. I am pre-recording this on January 9th. Yesterday, from my point of view, as of the recording of this video, was January 8th, generally known to Doctor Who fans as William Hartnell's birthday. He would have been 114 years old had he been alive, or had that been a possibility. I spent pretty much all of last week's episode talking about William Hartnell's first ever televised story of Doctor Who, An Unearthly Child, and I spent an awful lot of time talking about the legacy and the massive contribution that this man has brought to this show, to this franchise. Without this man, it's very much possible that we wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't have this show to talk about. This show in and of itself probably wouldn't have existed. So, yeah, sadly, he was forced out of the show, obviously, as I'm pretty sure I talked about last week, for health reasons. But because of that, the show itself was able to last for as long as it did. Because of his deteriorating health, it was a stroke of genius by the producers and showrunners at the time to replace him and explain away his recasting by way of regeneration, which is why we have this, which is in the main intro of this show. So none of these actors and actresses would be associated with each other, essentially, without this man. And so I just wanted to take a few minutes to honor the legacy of Mr. William Hartnell, or Billy Hartnell, as he was called to his friends and family. On behalf of myself and the rest of the Northern Entertainment Group, I would like to wish just, you know, I'm very bad at this, but I would just like to wish William Hartnell, wherever he may be, a very happy birthday, and extend my love and respect to his remaining descendants and acquaintances, if they are still around. So thank you, William Hartnell. We couldn't have done this without you. Cheers. Now, not only we got that out of the way, I felt it was very important to point that out. We are here to discuss, well, Doctor Who, obviously. Now, last week, as I mentioned, we talked about the very first televised story of Doctor Who, An Unearthly Child. This week, however, we are covering the most recent televised episode of Doctor Who, namely Eve of the Daleks. The New Year's Eve, the most recent New Year's Eve special of the show, written by Chris Chibnal, obviously, as the majority of the Jodie Whittaker era episodes are, and obviously starring Jodie Whittaker as the Doctor, John Bishop as Dan Lewis, and Mandip Gill as Yasmin Khan. It also features two new characters. I apologize, I haven't actually done the research on the actors' names, but we have Sarah and Nick. Now, I will be starting by saying this. I, myself personally, and this is only just a personal subjective opinion, I did not enjoy this episode at all. I mean, I wouldn't say at all. There are definitely some things I loved about this episode, but for the most part, this was not a very good episode in my opinion. This is my so far least favorite holiday special of Doctor Who. It is in contention for my least favorite Dalek story, and possibly even my least favorite Jodie Whittaker era episode, which is a little weird for me because for those of you who watched my full review of Doctor Who Flux, or rather the 13th series of Doctor Who, you would know that two very specific episodes from Doctor Who Flux, the 13th season, or series, depending on who you ask, the Sontaran episode is in contention for being one of my, arguably my favorite Sontaran episode ever. And the Weeping Angel story is making a very strong case for being my personal favorite Weeping Angels story ever told, television or otherwise. So it's a little weird for me that this Dalek story is making a strong case for being my least favorite Dalek story of all time. Now, I will say this. It is, right now, I would say my least favorite Dalek story ever. However, it is not primarily because the story itself was bad. It is mostly tied to the fact that all the other Dalek episodes, especially the TV ones, are just really, really good. It's very hard to go wrong with the Daleks, and I would argue this episode did. Now, I'm going to be doing something very similar to what I did last week, where I went by almost scene per scene, shot per shot breakdown of the episode, which I did rewatch last night, preparing for this pre-tape. I will say this: the second rewatch of this episode, it was a bit rough and not enjoyable in the slightest. At least in the first time around, I didn't know what to expect. This time around, knowing what's going to happen, instead of actually making it better for a rewatch, it actually ended up making it worse. We start by obviously an opening scene that lets you know exactly when and where this episode is taking place. New Year's Eve, with a New Year's centric song. We see the character of Sarah walking into her business, talking to someone on the phone, which is later revealed to be Jeff, a person who is remained. He's name dropped all throughout this episode, but we do not know what his relationship with Sarah is. Is he a boyfriend, ex-boyfriend, sibling, cousin, a friend of the family, or just an employee? It's completely unknown as far as I'm concerned. And I did rewatch this episode. There is no hint towards the specific relationship between Sarah and Jeff, which makes my next point even more difficult, because the next character we see on screen is obviously Nick, who has a massive grin on his face at hearing Sarah is mad at Jeff and that she hates him. Now, I'm gonna say this. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I am that I haven't felt a certain level of happiness or smugness when I noticed a particular girl I had a crush on say that she hates the person she was currently with and wanted to break up with them. I am human. I make these types of mistakes. But what I'm trying to get at is both Sarah and Nick, which are the main problem in this episode, the main reason I am not a fan of this episode. Both of these two characters are very, very unlikable. I did not feel any sort of attachment to either of them right from the start. Right from Sarah's angry conversation with, or rather, a recording of a conversation with Jeff. She was of a very whiny character and a very complain-y character, and Nick who wasn't really that much better, continued to get much, much worse as the episode itself went on. And so when the characters you introduce, the one-off characters, as I like to say, the characters that are going to be joining the Doctor and crew during this special, when they're not likable, it's going to make it very, very hard for you to root for them and make it very, very difficult for you to want the Doctor to rescue them. There were times during this episode where I actually really I rooted for the Doctor to just turn around and leave these two behind and save herself and Yaz and Dan, which is not a good thing. That's not something you want from a Doctor Who episode. You want the Doctor to be able to save everyone, even someone as despicable as Rixton Slade, a reference to another completely unlikable character from another holiday special in the David Tennant era. And one of the main problems about Sarah and Nick is that, and I noticed this especially on the second rewatch, is how much these two characters, Sarah in particular, are simply just there as exposition drops. All they're really doing is just being there to supply the audience with exposition, going so far as to having Nick ask Sarah what are the types of things that he can't store in the warehouse storage, something that he probably should know by now since he visits the place often, and she just lays it out for him. No guns or weapons of any kind, no animals alive or dead, no food, explosive, hazardous, radioactive, whatever she says. And yeah, obviously that's exposition is going to become very important later, but it very much is apparent that the screenwriters did not know how to convey this much exposition throughout the episode, so they just decided to have a character, for no reason at all, ask another character to spell it out for them so that the audience could know. And to me, that's just bad storytelling. That's just a very bad and very sloppy storytelling where a character just tells you all the exposition you need to know for no apparent reason, as sort of telling it to another character, as opposed to having it come organically through the episode. And obviously, Nick goes to his unit, or rather storage unit, I should say. Sarah has a conversation on her phone with her mother, which is another very unlikable character in my opinion. She just shows up every 4 minutes to midnight, just for Sarah to have someone to argue with, which made me like her even less. The next thing that happens is the Doctor and friends are in the TARDIS dealing with the aftermath of the Flux, which is something that I pointed out in my review of the Flux, and I guess this is sort of my personal review of this episode because I didn't really get much of a chance to review and give my thoughts on the episode on my personal channel, my own YouTube channel, so I'm getting it to you now on this show. I did like a lot of stuff about the Flux, but something that really kind of irked me is that we never really figured out what happened to the TARDIS, and when the Flux itself ended, they just left the TARDIS that way and continued traveling on their merry way without even bothering to fix it. So I liked that this episode opened, or rather as far as the Doctor is concerned, opened with the Doctor trying to fix the TARDIS after what happened during the events of the Flux. And obviously the TARDIS lands on the Earth because the TARDIS, as the TARDIS usually does, she goes where she wants to go, where she thinks the Doctor needs to be at that particular moment, not specifically where the Doctor wants to go. In this case, it happens to be the warehouse. Obviously, the TARDIS becomes all weird on the inside and on the outside as a result of the reset, something we never actually seen the TARDIS do, but it becomes much more apparent later in the episode as it explains that this is the main reason for the time loop event. The Doctor and friends start to explore the warehouse itself as Nick is confronted by a Dalek, which almost immediately executes him. And then, well, obviously the Doctor and friends find Nick's body. are able to assess that a Dalek is involved. Another Dalek, or presumably the same Dalek, exterminates Sarah right before the Doctor arrives and tries to block out the Dalek's weaponry with her sonic, similar to what she did in her very first New Year's special Resolution. But as the Daleks usually tend to do, they learn and they adapt, and as a result, they're no longer affected by the Doctor's sonic screwdriver. The Dalek proceeds to exterminate the Doctor, Yaz, and Dan, which then obviously leads into the opening title, or rather the opening credits, and then everything comes back around, indicating that this is a time loop type story, or as Dan rightfully so puts it, a Groundhog Day type story. Obviously, the characters have a strong case of deja vu. That is one thing I actually did like about the episode, is that it doesn't waste time, doesn't let the characters die multiple times before they realize they're in a time loop. And obviously, characters as smart as the Doctor and Yaz, characters who have actually traveled through time for a very long time now, they realize it straight away. They're calling it deja vu, but obviously the Doctor, Dan, and Yaz know what's up, know what's going on. So I did appreciate the fact that the characters pick up on the fact that this is a time loop very, very quickly, as opposed to dying multiple times before they figure it out. I'm just going to take a sip of my tea because I'm going to be sitting here talking for a very long time. I don't want my throat to dry out. So give me a second. So the Doctor tries to save Nick and Nick, which is something that she failed to do the first time. Sarah tries to find a weapon, which again brings me back to the exposition dump earlier, because she's explicitly said that weapons aren't allowed in the warehouse storage facility, and then she immediately goes out to look for a weapon, knowing full well that it's not permitted. So she herself isn't quite aware of her own rules. And obviously then that is when the exposition dump comes into play, where she finds all this stuff that Jeff is keeping storage. Obviously, she continues to do more exposition dump and saying how much she doesn't like Jeff, and the whole give the man an inch and he'll take a corridor type dialogue. I did not appreciate that. And then she finds that he has food in there, stuffed dead animals, all sorts of things that aren't allowed, all sorts of things that she explicitly said in the exposition dump earlier are not allowed in the storage unit. And then obviously she gets exterminated again, and the Doctor finds her body again, and obviously she is then confronted by another Dalek, getting exterminated once again, and starting the loop all over again. Now, obviously, something that is becoming apparent to the Doctor and the audience at this point is that every time they all get exterminated and the time loop starts up all over again, they have the time loop itself is slowly getting shorter. They started the episode at 9 minutes to midnight, then it was 8 minutes to midnight, and by the third time around, it was 7 minutes to midnight, slowly counting down to midnight. Who the hell knows what happens at midnight if they're not able to stop the Daleks before that. Obviously, at that point, or maybe even the previous time, I can't remember, it's a little jumbly in my brain, but at that point, we are already introduced to the fact that the entire warehouse is encased with a force field, presumably built up by the Daleks, preventing the characters from leaving into the outside world, encasing, I guess you could call it a time lock or a temporal bubble, as they say. Now, on the third time around, Sarah and Nick meet up in the hallway, and then they're almost immediately confronted by, or rather, are met by the Doctor and friends, meeting for the first time in this time loop, and then obviously the Dalek chases them into Nick's storage unit, which at that moment, that is really when this character of Nick, which I didn't particularly appreciate right from the start, that is when I really didn't. I started to like him even less when you actually realize what he's actually storing in his storage unit, objects or items from his ex-girlfriends that he's keeping in a warehouse because just in case they come back and ask for it, as opposed to just calling them and asking them if they want their stuff back, or alternatively just throwing it away. I I mean, I'm not a big fan of Sarah in this episode, but I do have to agree she does have a point. If they left it at his apartment, they're probably not coming back to get it, so they probably don't want it. Just throw it away. And even he goes so far as to saying that he doesn't want it in his eyesight. That's why he doesn't keep it in his apartment, or his flat, I should say. That's why he's putting it in storage. But then you don't want it in your eyesight, eyeline, but you're still keeping it. There's, I don't know. There's some definite weirdness in there that just amounts to a not so well written character. He obviously does something very chivalrous later when he offers up to reason with the Daleks to try to tell the Dalek to take him, exterminate him, and leave the other ones alone. Now, some people might say that was a very stupid thing for him to do. However, keep that in mind. This person has never seen or met or has even heard of a Dalek before. He doesn't know that they cannot be reasoned with. You cannot talk to these creatures. So he doesn't know how pointless what he's doing is. Alternatively, what he does know is that he's stuck in a time loop, meaning if the Dalek kills him again, he's just going to come back again. So it's not that stupid of a decision of him to make. I did like that he does that. I don't think it was completely necessary at the time. However, this gives the Doctor an opportunity to talk to the Dalek, or rather taunt him, as the Doctor tends to do whenever Daleks are concerned. And that is when you actually get some good exposition dump by the Dalek itself, telling you why the Daleks are even there in the first place. This is all just revenge from the Daleks, or rather, they're trying to punish the Doctor for crimes against the Dalek fleet committed during the last episode of the Flux series, when she literally used the Flux to destroy the entire Dalek war fleet. And here's another thing I like about the Doctor in this episode. First of all, the Doctor herself in this episode, I just loved it. The Doctor in this episode is not something that I disliked about this episode. I loved her assessment of the situation, how she understands immediately what is happening, and I just loved the way she jumps to conclusions in this episode. The Doctor is a very standout character in this episode, not so much the other two characters who were introduced specifically for this episode. But another thing I liked about what the Doctor does in this episode, this scene specifically, is that when the Dalek mentions that she's going to be punished for her actions against the Daleks, she straight up says, which action in particular? I actually did like that little exchange between the Doctor and the Dalek, but obviously then everyone gets exterminated again. So the time loop restarts. The Doctor was already told Sarah to regroup in floor 5 to bring all the dangerous and hazardous material that Jeff is potentially storing up there to use as weapons against the Dalek. But Sarah, is fully aware that Nick doesn't know the plan, she immediately goes to look for him, completely abandoning the Doctor and friends. Now, then the Doctor picks up another Dalek signal on her sonic screwdriver, indicating that there's another Dalek in the vicinity. And then Dan does a completely badass bowler move of just going downstairs to distract the Dalek, once again, knowing full well that this is a time loop, and if he dies, he's going to come back again the next time around. And I think I've said this in my review of the Flux series. Dan is a character that I bought into immediately. I instantly liked that character as soon as he came up on screen. I now like him even more because of that, because of the selfless act of sacrifice. Again, fully understanding that this is a time loop and the stakes aren't really that high if he dies again, but I just loved his sacrifice in that moment for the Dalek, which also led into a pretty funny comedic moment of him taunting the Dalek as a delaying tactic before the Dalek realizes what's happening and then proceeds to exterminate him. Meanwhile, the Doctor and Yaz go to find all of Jeff's things, and again, the exposition dump comes into play again, and it even goes into the pretty much quoting exactly what Sarah said earlier, saying that this is the sort of stuff that if you ask yourself, if I set fire to this, will this explode or have any kind of dangerous reaction? The answer would be yes. Again, I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact quote, but that I liked it when that moment happened. I did not need the pointless, useless exposition dump that early in the episode. It could have just been done more organically throughout some of the other time loops that or rather resets that happened in the episode itself. I will say this though: when Yaz and the Doctor find the warehouse, the storage unit full of beans and beef, which is disgusting just to even think about it. But I did appreciate Yaz is saying, who looks at beans and said, oh, this could be a little bit more beefy, which is potentially, I like to say it's a reference to something that Captain Jack once said in his debut story, when he said, who looks at a screwdriver and thinks, oh, this could be a little more sonic. I liked that subtle reference there. Obviously, then the Doctor and Yaz continue to explore the storage unit, realizing that it's entirely possible that Jeff might actually be living in that storage unit. But again, the living quarters will only actually come into play later in the episode. The Doctor, Yaz, Sarah, the Doctor and Yaz get exterminated again, but before that, Sarah does actually come across Nick, trying to save him, saying that she's sorry for all the things that she said. They're trying to hide from a Dalek, completely escaping the warehouse without the Doctor and friends. Again, very unlikable characters. They just leave the Doctor there. Now I get it; they don't really have much reason to trust them. As far as they're concerned, they're the reason the Daleks are even there in the first place. But still, it's I don't know. There's just something about these two characters that they just keep making the wrong decisions, very bad character decisions, very poorly written characters, which are the main reason I am not a big fan of this episode. And obviously, they go into a much longer conversation of Nick saying why he's even there. The whole reason he's there is because he actually has a crush on Sarah, which she never actually told her. And again, it goes back into you keep saving all of these items that your ex-girlfriends leave behind. You're keeping them there in case they want it back, instead of actually asking out the woman you actually do want to be with. Nick is a very questionable character in this episode, and it's just, like I said, I did not appreciate both these two characters. And even when he finally reveals that he had a crush on her for 3 years, she goes into a fit of rage, which is how the Daleks find them and exterminate Nick again. Sarah tries to leave Nick behind and escape the warehouse. She actually manages to find a door that isn't affected by the force field, but she isn't able to open it before the Dalek exterminates her again, going into another loop, which is even shorter than last time. And this time, the Doctor does actually manage to catch up with Sarah. Obviously, very angry angry with her that she left them all behind. But then Sarah does something that kind of slightly redeems her in my eyes, saying that she only really went after Nick because, as far as she knows, Nick doesn't survive past 5 minutes too. So she had to go to save him because if he dies again, he might actually die for good this time. But then Nick does something also very redeemable, is by pulling the old, forcing the two dogs to shoot at him while ducking, causing the two dogs to destroy each other in the crossfire. And even the doctor, who then goes to look for him, actually really likes that maneuver. But then she brings Nick back to the fold. They come up with a plan to defeat the Daleks, which then leads into a great, incredible speech by the Doctor. And for those of you who know me very well, you know that I just love great speeches by the Doctor in all their various different incarnations. And I'm all there for it. Now, I will say this. Jodie Whittaker, in my opinion, has not had quite as many memorable, iconic, great speeches throughout her tenure, and I would mostly attribute that fact to the fact that Stephen Moffat is no longer showrunning the show and writing scripts for the episode. I don't think Chris Chibnal is as good of a writer as Stephen Moffat, obviously, and so the level of quality of great speeches by the Doctor has gone down significantly. I do believe that Jodie Whittaker has so far had at least 3 really, really good speeches. Her speech in her debut episode, The Woman Who Fell to Earth, a speech right towards the end of the Battle of Ranskor of Kolos, and another speech during the horror of Villa Diodati. I think that is the full title of the episode. But this speech right there is a new addition to the pantheon of great speeches by the Doctor. I personally wouldn't put it on the same level as Matt Smith's Rings of Akatan speech or Peter Capaldi's The Zygon Inversion speech, but it's definitely a great speech by the Doctor and very worthwhile remembering. Which I'm actually a bit upset at myself that I didn't memorize the speech before going live. It's been a pretty hectic day today, but I loved the Doctor's speech there when she fully comes up with a plan. Now, we move on from the great speech that I really, really liked to something else I really liked about this episode. Again, I didn't completely hate this episode. There are some things that I liked about it, but for the most part, it felt very monotonous with very unlikable characters and just a bad showing for the Daleks. But we'll get to that when we finish the breakdown of the episode. We move on from the great speech I liked to another thing I really, really liked about this episode is that immediately after everyone's all set with the plan, the Daleks already figured out the plan and have already begun sabotaging the plan. I loved the Daleks' relentlessness in this episode, and I loved how clever the Daleks were. They were able to one-up the Doctor at every single turn. It was kind of like a chess game where the Daleks were always a few steps ahead of the Doctor in this episode. Because if the Daleks are very easily defeated, it makes for a very bad Dalek story. So I liked the fact that the Daleks were actually one step ahead of the Doctor and friends at any given moment, which all obviously led to this loop essentially being a complete waste. They had a plan, but they couldn't execute it right because the Daleks had already figured it out. And so Nick and Sarah get pretty much uselessly exterminated, which makes the Doctor very angry as she gets exterminated herself and comes back around for another loop. And then the Daleks have done something that at this point they really, really should know that they should stop doing. At this point, they made the Doctor angry. Again, that is not something smart to do, but the Daleks continue to fall for that trap time and time again. They made the Doctor very angry, which now means that she means business. She's not holding back at all. Something that I skipped a little bit because for timing. When the Doctor goes to search for Sarah and Nick, she asks Dan and Yaz to stay behind, which leads into a beautiful moment between Yaz and Dan, where you actually realize, or rather, it's confirmed, I should say, that Yaz has feelings for the Doctor, romantic feelings, I should say, and yeah, Dan once again pulling off a great character moment for himself and a great character moment for Yaz, telling her essentially, "I waited way too long to tell someone how I feel about them, and then the universe ended, and that was a whole thing. So I don't want to see it happen to you, Sheffield." I believe that's the exact quote. I'm not 100% sure on that, but yeah, that then becomes another extra B plot for us to consider in this episode. And then when the Doctor tells Yaz to go find Sarah and Nick and bring them to the basement area for a reworking of her original plan, there's a moment there where the Doctor is left alone with Dan, and Dan is able to say to the Doctor that, as he puts it, Yaz likes the Doctor, which again, it's another massive thing for the Doctor to consider while she's trying to save everybody. Not a very smart thing to do, to put all that much pressure on the Doctor's character, but she does manage to work her way around it. Once Nick, Yaz, and Sarah arrive, the Doctor is able to share the revised plan with them, a plan within a plan. The Daleks have always been one step ahead of them the entire time, so they need to be one step ahead of the Daleks, I should say. So the next loop is essentially kind of a decoy loop, a waste of a loop. They need to get exterminated again to execute the plan in the final loop, where they only have 1 minute left to execute the plan properly. So the Doctor then taunts the Daleks one more time, causing them to get confused and worried, which again the Doctor excels at. Again, I love the exchanges that the Doctor has with the Daleks in all three Dalek stories we've seen from Jodie Whittaker so far. She does know exactly which buttons to push for the Daleks. She knows exactly how to rile them up, having obviously battled the Daleks for so many years, which then obviously leads to the decoy loop, which leaves some time for the two characters to get some closure, I should say, to wrap up some character storylines in their own episode. Sarah trying to have a normal and decent conversation with her mom, which goes about as well as you can expect. Again, I did say I'm not a really big fan of both those characters, so that part of the episode is a bit of a wash for me. What I did actually enjoy is Nick stacking up all the different stuff from his ex-girlfriends and hiding behind it, knowing the Dalek would try to blow up the things, essentially ending his anchor, as it were, the thing that really tethered him to those ex-girlfriends of his, and just, it was a relief. And he even says to the Dalek, thanks for the therapy. The Dalek asks for an explanation, and then he gives one of my personal favorite lines from the episode, X-terminated. I mean, it's a very cheap pun, but I like it. So I did really enjoy that part of the episode before Nick gets exterminated again. Another one of the Daleks goes to find the Doctor and friends chilling on the couches that Jeff brought to his storage unit. The Doctor taunts the Daleks one more time, potentially one final time, before they all get exterminated for one last time to start the final loop. All the players begin to execute the final phase of the plan. All the pieces on the chessboard are placed perfectly for the climax. They all Sarah calls her mom and asks her to call her back 10 seconds before midnight. She gives obviously her phone to the doctor. They go back to the basement. They set up all the explosives there. The doctor turns off the lights, tells everyone to go away, activates the phone decoy thing. The Dalek confuses the phone for an actual human. The Daleks, all three of them, and actually I do have a picture of this. All three of the Daleks converge on the pile of fireworks, shooting at them all in unison and blowing the entire place to Kingdom Come. Which then obviously it leads to actual midnight and fireworks, as is traditional with New Year's Eve. We get a brief cameo from a character that was introduced in Jodie Whittaker's first episode, The One Who Fell to Earth, the human guy who was targeted by Zem Shah of the Stenza, which the Doctor saved in her very first adventure. This is a fun cameo. It was completely unnecessary, but I guess Chris Chibnal, knowing his stint as showrunner is coming to an end, I guess he felt the need to include that in this episode, which is perfectly fine and understandable as far as I'm concerned. The warehouse itself goes into flames, or rather bursts up in fireworks. The Doctor and Yaz sorta share a moment there. The TARDIS crew go back to the TARDIS, which is now fully restored. Hold on, I'll take myself off the screen for a second. Yeah, the TARDIS goes back to her original state, which looks like this, the background of this very episode. Yaz confronts the Doctor about what she said earlier about her time. Time is catching up with her, and her consequences are literally catching up with her, which is obviously a reference to what Time said to her in the final episode of The Flux. I'm assuming that that's going to continue to be a lingering subplot of these last few specials, similar to how the For Knox subplot was very prominent in David Tennant's last few specials. I mentioned on my full review of The Flux how I didn't quite like the fact that they're basically retreading what happened in Tennant's final few episodes for Jodie Whittaker. I think the 10th and 13th Doctor have already had way too many similarities already. They don't need to add another one on top of it. But this is the way things are being done now, and I'm just going to sit back and enjoy it as best I could. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if this whole stuff is going to be, if this whole time catching up with the Doctor is going to be a prevalent subplot in the next few stories. Then something that Chris Chibnal kind of brought back and popularized with the Jodie Whittaker era is that every episode the Doctor kind of suggests what their next adventure is going to be like, referencing what will be seen in just a minute in the next time trailer, and then the final scene of the episode starts with Sarah and Nick going into a taxi together as they start to travel the world together, presumably as a couple. And that is it. That is the end of the episode. Again, I did not like the episode for those two particular characters. I did not think the Daleks were very well. I didn't think it was a very good Dalek story. There are some interesting and really stupid and goofy lines that the Daleks say in this episode. A few that come to mind are, "I am not Nick. Daleks do not have friends. Daleks do not store stuff. Daleks are not fair." And I would call it a personal favorite, but since it's a dishonorable mention It's a personal least favorite, I should say. Daleks do not have managers. These lines have these the Room type quality where it's so bad it's good, but it actually is bad. So I think the Daleks are funny, goofy characters in and of themselves, on top of being terrifying, murderous creatures. Any attempts to forcefully make the Daleks funny by saying stupid lines like this, it feels a little bit forced. I will say this: I'm being a bit of a hypocrite by saying that, because one of my favorite lines from the goofy lines from the Daleks ever is actually during the Matt Smith era, when a Dalek literally says, "Would you care for some tea?" So yeah, that was funny, but I think it actually fit the situation better, and it didn't feel forced the same way that these lines I just mentioned actually do kind of feel forced for the Daleks. Now, here's the thing. The Daleks are my personal favorite villains in Doctor Who, and it is very, very hard to go wrong with the Daleks. Again, this is my least favorite Dalek story, but it's not because it's a bad story necessarily. It's because all the other Dalek stories are just so much better. And it's stupid, goofy moments like this, forced goofiness, I should say, that really bring this episode down a peg, in my opinion. And overall, I'd say that this was a thing that happened, and this is one of the last few specials of Doctor Who, and it's forever immortalized in Doctor Who history from now on going forward. Now, one thing I really want to point out about this episode is that Chris Chibnal, before production on Series 13 started, Chris Chibnal has actually stated that because of COVID limitations and because of the restrictions placed on filmmakers at this point, there were only two ways that they could have filmed Series 13. The first of which, the least favorable one, was have each episode be mostly contained to one location with only a few guest actors or characters, I should say, and pretty low budget. The other option, which is the option that they ended up going with, is a full-scale, almost 6-hour movie type event, which is the Flux. That's actually what they ended up doing, and I feel like they made the right choice by going with it for the Flux series. I really thought they made the right choice. This episode, in and of itself, is a good example of what every other episode of Series 13 probably would have looked like had they gone with the original plan, and I'm glad they didn't go for it. Now, obviously, not every single one of those episodes would have been a time loop necessarily, but you get the idea. One single location, very few sets, only 2 other actors, 2 or 3 Daleks, and then very minimal special effects. That was basically this episode in a nutshell. I will say this: I've been talking a lot of negative stuff about this episode. There are some things I liked about it. Like I said, the Doctor's interactions with the Daleks, Dan being a great companion, I think was great. One thing that I really only realized on my second rewatch was that something that I actually feel was very subtle and not forced, which is the idea that the whole countdown, the minute-by-minute countdown with each loop, was essentially the countdown to midnight, the countdown to the new year, which everyone usually does on New Year's Eve, literally ending with fireworks on midnight. So I did actually appreciate that. I didn't quite catch that the first time I watched this episode. I caught it the second time. So I loved that part of the episode itself. A couple of things I feel like I should point out about this episode. The specific model of the Daleks seen in this episode, there they are. You can see that they still have the manipulator arm that was used by the reconnaissance Dalek in Jodie Whittaker's first Dalek story, Resolution, but they have these new weapon, the rapid-fire guns, which they look cool, but they're not very practical because that just means the Daleks have more of an opportunity to miss. And watching a lot of other Dalek stories, the Daleks very rarely miss, so it's kind of weird that now that they have a much better weapon, they tend to miss a lot. Speaking of Resolution, I should say that Resolution, the first New Year's Eve in the Chris Chibnal era, and Revolution of the Daleks, the second episode, the second New Year's Eve special of this era, are basically continuations of one another. Basically a two-parter spread out across one full year, which I liked. So understandably so, a lot of people were asking themselves, is this third one, Eve of the Daleks, is going to be like the third part of a trilogy of Daleks? Clearly, it wasn't. This episode was mainly a continuation of the Flux series, but I will say this. This not being the trilogy that people were thinking initially is not really a reason at all why I did not like the episode, because I judged the episode on its own, not comparing it to the other two episodes that came before it. I loved Resolution on its own as a standalone, and while Revolution of the Daleks is very clearly a continuation of that story, it's very much a very good episode on its own without needing the help of Resolution to hype it up. This one is not a very good one for the books of Doctor Who. Now, I will say this: another thing about the Daleks, this specific model of the Daleks is referred to as Executioner Daleks. Now, if you're thinking that's a completely new thing, it is not. The Executioner Daleks is actually an expanded Doctor Who media thing, which is actually a lot more recent than you would imagine. This is what an Executioner Dalek looks like, and they were actually very recently added to the Doctor Who mythos during 2020's massive cross-media storyline titled Time Lord Victorious. It's a storyline that I personally haven't really had much of a chance to check out yet, but it mainly consists of several CD audio releases, comic books, a few books, and a 5 or 6 part web series on the Doctor Who YouTube channel, which I did actually check out, and it was very, very fun and enjoyable. But yeah, the Executioner Dalek, as you can tell, very, very different from the Executioner Dalek we got in this episode. And the reason why I bring that up is that this is a very rare occasion where showrunners of Doctor Who are bringing stuff from expanded media stuff that isn't on television into a television episode, similar to what we've seen fairly recently in something like the Book of Boba Fett, bringing a character like Black Chrysanthemum from the Star Wars comics into the Book of Boba Fett, making his live-action debut. The BBC tends to not do that, especially for Doctor Who. It is a different philosophy, and the main reasoning for that is if they feel like an episode of Doctor Who on television forces the audience to go out and buy a book or a comic specifically so they can understand the backstory of a certain character, then the showrunners and storytellers have not done a proper job. They want it to be its own thing. They don't want to force the audience to read extra material in order to understand what's going on television. I agree and disagree to certain degrees, on this philosophy. And a great example I can bring up is I just recently rewatched Spider-Man No Way Home over the weekend with my parents. And the thing about that movie is, while you do have to watch the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies and the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies in order to understand most of what's going on in the movie, most of the characters. Uh, Contrary to popular belief, the 3 to 4 seasons featuring Charlie Cox as Daredevil, or rather Matt Murdock, are not completely required viewing, in my opinion. All you really need to do is that Charlie Cox plays a lawyer called Matt Murdock. Matt Murdock himself really is only on screen for 2.5 minutes, and all he really does is just tell Peter Parker that he's going to need a much better lawyer than him, and then he catches a brick that's being thrown at them. That's it. That's the only thing that Matt Murdock does in that episode. You don't necessarily need to immerse yourself in everything that character has been through on the Marvel Netflix side. It would help because personally I think that show is really great, but it's not required viewing to understand the story of Spider-Man No Way Home. So as long as the BBC can maintain a certain balance where they bring in stuff from expanded media stuff and not so but make it subtle, make it more like Matt Murdock showing up in that movie as opposed to Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield showing up in that movie. I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good balance that they can keep. One final thing I want to say about this episode in particular is that one really thing I liked about this episode is the next time teaser. And that's not a very good sign when some of the things you actually like about this episode is actually the teaser for the next episode that has next to nothing to do with the episode itself. But that's beside the point. I really do think that the next time teaser was handled very, very well. I really liked it. It's a very good teaser for what's to come in the next episode, the next special. And again, I liked that they're bringing back the Hartnell era. Speaking of William Hartnell, the Hartnell era gimmick of showing you the title of the next episode. And I really enjoyed how they did that in this episode, where the letters of the title of the next episode show up slowly, one after the other, as they're building up the main titular villain of the next episode, which are going to be the Sea Devils. The Sea Devils are classic era villains that I really, really liked. And I'm actually a bit disappointed that it took them this long to bring them back into the modern era. And I'm actually surprised that it took Chris Chibnal as long as it did to bring them back, because let's not forget, Chris Chibnal actually is the one that brought the Silurians back to classic Who with The Hungry Earth and Cold Blood, his main Matt Smith era storylines. He actually brought back those characters for the classic era, so I'm surprised it took him this long to bring back the Sea Devils. However, I fully understand why it took him this long, because basically the Sea Devils are just the Silurians but underwater. And that's not even a comparison. That is literally what they are. They are a different branch of the species that branched off from the Silurians. The Silurians stayed on land, while the Sea Devils evolved to exist underwater. So that's literally what they are. And I like to say I actually love this design. It basically maintains almost the exact same design of the Sea Devils from the original John Pertwee era classic Who, the episode that they appeared in. I liked the design. I've seen some people criticizing the design, that they basically just didn't update the design like they did for the Silurians when they brought them back. I liked it. I liked the consistency. And guess what? They basically had the Sontarans in during the series 13 look pretty much exactly like the Sontarans from the classic era, and I didn't mind that. I actually preferred that look of the Sontarans as opposed to the goofy midget-like look of the Sontarans from the David Tennant era. Although I will say Strax is one of the best characters in Doctor Who ever. It's just, I'm not a big fan of the way that the Sontarans looked like. However, that is a story for another day. One final thing I want to talk about before we wrap up this episode, because I've already gone over the 1 hour mark, and I can already hear Soda whispering in my ear, "Wrap it up, man! Wrap it up! You gotta go." But one final thing I wanted to address, and this is me going into serious mode for once for this bit. A few months ago, in November of last year, a British member of Parliament said some pretty stupid things, in my opinion, specifically tied to Doctor Who. He referenced a bunch of other media franchises, but he specifically targeted Doctor Who, saying that recasting the role of the Doctor as a female is a bad thing because it takes away a role model that was essentially created for boys and making it specifically a role model for girls, which, and I am not making a joke, this is actually what he said. He said that is the main reason why there is a rise recently in male crime rates all over the United Kingdom. A lot of people didn't really pay much notion to it. I do remember another member of Parliament, or I don't know, maybe an executive of the BBC saying that boys have had male role models, positive role models for them for decades now. I think they'll be fine with just recasting the Doctor as a woman. And obviously, that member of Parliament that I mentioned earlier, John Fletcher, I think his name is. I didn't really care too much to learn his name, but he specifically says that because there's no positive role model like the Doctor for boys now, boys are being forced to pick other negative role models like the ones seen on Peaky Blinders. But like I said, most people didn't really pay much attention to it until recently. Last week, Jodie Whittaker responded to this load of nonsense, saying that she finds his assessment of the situation amusing, but also unnerving. And basically what she means by that is that she thinks it's funny that someone actually would even suggest that idea, because it is a ludicrous idea. It is a ridiculous notion in and of itself, but as she also says, it is unnerving at the same time that someone actually was able to think of something this ridiculous and idiotic, for lack of a better word. And I would like to say I address that and say my personal thoughts and opinions on it is that I, for the most part, agree with Jodie. It is a completely ridiculous and asinine, for lack of a better word, notion to even suggest that. And I am very much worried that people are now starting to come up with excuses to that, simply because a beloved character for many, many, many years has now been recast as a female. And I would also like to take the time to address this. Jodie Whittaker, the 13th Doctor, the first female Doctor on television, canonically that is the actress that has gone through the most amount of negative criticism from the fans. And no other actor who has played the Doctor has experienced such a massive backlash from toxic fans and non-toxic fans alike regarding her stint as the Doctor. Her era is in my opinion, going to go down as one of the most heavily criticized eras of Doctor Who ever. And it's sad to me that uh, what I consider to be such a really good doctor, a really good actress in the role of the Doctor, is being forced to go through this much criticism. And it's sad to me that we as a Doctor Who fan community can't really put our differences aside and just accept that the Doctor is a female now. Now, obviously, a lot of people have issues with Jodie Whittaker being the Doctor that don't necessarily have anything to do with her being a female Doctor. A lot of people actually have issues with uh, the way she approached the role. Definitely some of the storylines that have happened during her era. Obviously, her era is mostly going to be remembered for the Timeless Children storyline, which did not go very favorably with a lot of people in the fan community. From what I've been seeing online, a lot of people do actually like that storyline. I myself have grown to like this storyline in particular, but a lot of people did not really appreciate the Timeless Child storyline, and a lot of people are really accusing her and Chris Chibnal for ruining Doctor Who in their opinion. And it's just, I think it's about time we all just grow up and realize that Jodie Whittaker being a female Doctor, the Doctor itself being a female cast with a female actress, it's just a natural part of the show's evolution. I started this episode talking about William Hartnell and his contribution to the show, and that without him, we wouldn't have had um, the type of show that Doctor Who is. And change is inevitable. Change is a part of the DNA of the show, in as much so that it is a part of life. And the sooner we grow up and accept it, and even if a certain storyline changes our understanding of who the Doctor has been this entire time, this shouldn't be considered a negative thing. This shouldn't deter us from continuing watching the show. And the best part about this show, you don't like a certain actor as a companion or as a Doctor, you don't like a side character, a villain, a storyline, guess what? A couple of years from now, it's all going to change. You don't like a particular showrunner, they're going to be replaced eventually. So just, if you don't like the Jodie Whittaker era, that is entirely your choice and your subjective opinion. I'm not going to criticize that. But if you don't like it, then just, it's okay to skip it. They're going to recast Jodie Whittaker eventually. Sorry, I've been talking for too long. But she's going to get recast eventually. Chris Chibnal is going to be replaced eventually. The show is going to be completely different by this time next year, potentially. So that's really all I have to say. The show is as multifaceted and as interchangeable as life itself. It's time to accept that. People didn't like Capaldi. Guess what? He was recast with a different actress. People didn't much appreciate. Some people didn't much appreciate Matt Smith or David Tennant. Guess what? They both got replaced. A lot of people didn't like Colin Baker back in the day. He was replaced. It's all just a matter of perspective. And just remember that we are all fans of this franchise. We are all here because we love it. Focus on what you love about this episode, about this franchise, and not about what you hate about this franchise. And just be fans. I myself personally have gone on record multiple times saying that I am not a fan of this character, Clara Oswald. Guess what? She was around for a couple of seasons and then she left. And I accepted it. It's all part of the DNA of the show. The show is about change. The show is about evolution. The show is about progress. If you don't like the Jodie Whittaker era, that's fine. Don't like it. Just don't attack people online who like it, and certainly do not attack the actors or showrunners associated with the property. It is not their fault. All they are doing is just telling the story as best they think is possible. That is all I wanted to say. I've already gone 10 minutes above what I was permitted to do, so I'm just going to leave you with that for some food for thought. Hopefully, next episode won't be quite as long as this one. And speaking of which, next episode will be my first time covering a non-televised story, and I will be covering the first ever Big Finish Doctor Who story, The Sirens of Time, a story that I actually really enjoyed listening to the first time, and I'm going to use this week break that I have now, first of all, to restore my voice, but also to re-listen to that story again, because it's been a while since I listened to it the first time. So, thank you for watching, if you have, and since I still don't have a fancy outro, I'm just going to play for the third time today the intro of the show, and I think that's an interesting, a good way of ending this show. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed listening to me talking about Doctor Who, you can check out my personal YouTube channel, 50 Shades of Geek. I talk about all kinds of stuff. I talk mostly about modern stuff, Doctor Who. I have a mostly daily Pokemon Go show, and all kinds of other stuff. I do trailer reactions there, all kinds of fun stuff. Feel free to check out this channel in particular, the Northern Entertainment Group. We have a Star Wars show. We have mostly Schmodown stuff. We have a show called Get Sweaty with me, Soda, and Ben. We have all kinds of stuff on this channel. Feel free to check it out if you so please. So until the next time, everybody, have a pleasant week, and always remember that, and always have your timey-wimey be wibbly-wobbly. Goodbye. Alonzi.